Guys, how's it going? I'm super excited to show you our new studio. We are kind of figuring out the steps. There we go. I'm trying to center myself. It's very challenging. I am trying to figure this out partly on my own because Andy's doing his own work, very important work. And I'm trying to get the stage set so we can have a really great professional looking show. Thankfully, he's been able to help me a little bit in his free time, but it's definitely still a work in progress. And tomorrow we're house sitting, so we're not even going to be here. So we did all of this, not in vain, but maybe a little bit prematurely, I guess. No worries. It'll be fine. Life has constantly changed. I feel like being an adult is nothing but like a string of busy events to get to and stuff to do. So tonight we have kind of a heavy topic. And this is actually something that my mother-in-law sent me a link to this morning. And I was fascinated to read what this was about because I never expected this in 100 years. This is from the New York Times, and we are going to thoroughly unpack it. We're going to read the Daily Caller's analysis. We're going to look at what Media Matters has to say about what Matt Walsh was doing. There are a lot of different moving parts here, and we're also going to get into what the AP had to say about this kind of thing. So we're going to see if I get demonetized. I'll have to let you know for sure. I'm going to be very respectful. I appreciate everything that people go through around this really sensitive topic, and I think people believe, especially in Media Matters, which we're going to look at today for sure, I think they believe that conservatives are fully unempathetic, if not borderline evil, which is such a narrow and slanted way to look at the world, and I don't think it gives people enough of the benefit of the doubt. Obviously, I'm a conservative. I know that I'm not evil. I was actually listening to a Twitter live. You know how you can join these listening spaces on Twitter and just kind of hear what people are saying about this stuff. I was listening to I forget what they're called. They're called listening groups. And I was listening to one with Batya Ungar Sargon and Andrew Yang and some other big fun names. And they were talking about an organization called Better Angels, which is really neat. If you guys have not seen Better Angels and have never heard of them, I really recommend checking them out because they are an organization that puts on what my friend Carrie Smith used to call, she used to do these, I forget what she called them, but they were dinners where people with opposing viewpoints would get together and talk about what they found, things that they agreed on, which is something that Andy and I have also kicked around because we were like, well, we really need to find the stuff that we agree on and see how we can build bridges with people we don't agree with politically. So I will touch back on that at the end of the video, but I kind of hope that this video is able to show you guys what the damage of some of this polarization has done, because it really has put some of our most vulnerable members at serious risk. So let's jump into it. The piece we never thought we'd see. They paused puberty, but is there a cost? Dun dun dun, let's find out. Tim always said that if there was a question in the headline, the answer was always yes. And I'm inclined to believe that is exactly what is going to unwind over the course of this article. We're going to read the whole thing, and then we're going to look at what the Daily Caller has to say, we'll look at what the AP has to say, and it'll be pretty thorough, I think. Let's go for it. Okay, puberty blockers can ease transgender youth's anguish and buy time to weigh options. But concerns are growing about long-term physical effects and other consequences. So, just to pause, I don't know how many of you guys have seen What is a Woman, which is a very, very excellent documentary that Matt Walsh put together. It is an excellent analysis of what people really think about puberty blockers. And one of the doctors in this video said that puberty blockers were like a pause button so that you could think about what your options were before you move on to being a certain gender or another. So let's see if this is actually the case based on what not me, not Ben Shapiro, not Matt Walsh is saying, but the New York Times. This is from Megan Tolley and Christina Jewett. The medical guidance was direct. 11-year-old Emma Vasquez had identified as a girl since toddlerhood. Now, she worried about male puberty starting. A Phoenix pediatrician advised, take a drug to stop it. At 13, JC Chavira felt increasingly uncomfortable with her maturing body and was beginning to believe she was a boy. Use the drug, her endocrinologist in Southern California recommended, and puberty would be suspended. An 11-year-old in New York with deepening depression expressed a desire to no longer be a girl. A therapist told the family the drug was preteen's best option, and a local doctor agreed. Puberty blockers really help kids like this, the child's mother recalled the therapist saying. It was presented as a tourniquet that would stop the hemorrhaging. As the number of adolescents who identify as transgender grows, drugs known as puberty blockers have become the first line of intervention for the youngest ones seeking medical treatment. Their use is typically framed as a safe and reversible way to buy time to weigh a medical transition and avoid the anguish of growing into a body that feels wrong. Transgender adolescents suffer from disproportionately high rates of depression and other mental health issues, this we know. Studies show that the drugs have eased some patients' gender dysphoria, a distress over the mismatch of their birth sex and gender identity. Anxiety drains away, says Dr. Norman Spack, who pioneered the use of puberty blockers for trans youth in the United States and is one of many physicians who believe the drugs can be life-saving. You can see these kids being so relieved. But as increasing numbers of adolescents identify as transgender, in the United States an estimated 300,000 ages 13 to 17 and an untold number who are younger, concerns are growing among some medical professionals about the consequences of the drugs, a New York Times examination found. That's interesting. I'm going to have to give the New York Times props for this because it looks like they did some real journalism. Man, I just cannot get centered on this one. There we go. Okay, so let's listen to what they found. The questions are fueling government reviews in Europe, prompting a push for more research and leading some prominent specialists to reconsider at what age to prescribe them and for how long. A small number of doctors won't recommend them at all. Dutch doctors first offered puberty blockers to transgender adolescents 3 decades ago, typically following up with hormone treatment to help patient transition. Since then, the practice has spread to other countries with varying protocols, little documentation of outcomes, and no government approval of the drugs for that use, including by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. How was this allowed to happen? I am genuinely shocked by this because I used to work in healthcare and all of the medicine in use in the hospitals was approved by the FDA for the use that it is used for currently. Like, I don't know if you guys are aware of this. I'm going to mention Viagra was initially prescribed for a different use. It absolutely was. They found that a side effect was something that could be useful in a different circumstance. So that's what they use it for now. Very interesting to see. But in all those cases, people, the boards that sign off on these drugs always approve of this. So I don't understand how this was allowed to happen. Maybe we get into it in this article. Let's continue. But there is emerging evidence of potential harm from using blockers, according to reviews of scientific papers and interviews with more than 50 doctors and academic experts around the world. The drugs suppress estrogen and testosterone, hormones that help develop the reproductive system, but also affect the bones, the brain, and other parts of the body. I'm glad they mentioned that because I remember learning about adolescence and puberty and anatomy and physiology. There's a lot going on that we never think about. Like, your bones are developing, your physical framework is developing. There's a reason why males, biological males, men, are stronger and have broader shoulders and they have more muscle development and all that kind of thing. These are the things that develop during puberty that I don't think that anyone ever thinks about, but I digress. During puberty, bone mass typically surges, determining a lifetime of bone health. When adolescents are using blockers, bone density growth flatlines, on average, according to analysis commissioned by the Times of Observational Studies examining the effects. Good for them for commissioning this. This is wonderful. I'm very impressed by this. I think this is a wonderful thing. Hopefully they continue doing this. Many doctors treating trans patients believe they'll recover that loss when they go off blockers. But 2 studies from the analysis that tracked trans patients' bone strength while using blockers and through the first years of sex hormone treatment found that many do not fully rebound and lag behind their peers. That can lead to heightened risk of debilitating fractures earlier than would be expected from normal aging, in their 50s instead of 60s, and more immediate harm for patients who start treatment with already weak bones, experts say. There's going to be a price, said Dr. Sandeep Khosla, who leads a bone research lab at the Mayo Clinic, and the price is probably going to be some deficit in skeletal mass. Many physicians in the United States and elsewhere are prescribing blockers the patients at the first stage of puberty as early as age 8 and allowing them to progress to sex hormones as soon as 12 or 13. Starting treatment at young ages, they believe, helps patients become better aligned physically with their gender identity and helps protect their bones. But that could force life-altering choices, other doctors warn, before patients know who they really are. Puberty can help clarify gender, the doctors say, for some adolescents reinforcing their sex at birth and for others confirming that they are transgender. Sure, fine, whatever, we'll allow it. The most difficult question is whether puberty blockers do indeed provide valuable time for children and young people to consider their options, or whether they effectively lock in children and young people to a treatment pathway, wrote Dr. Hilary Cass, a pediatrician leading an independent review in England of medical treatment of adolescents presenting as transgender. So before we move on, I want to mention I do feel like puberty blockers absolutely do lock people in, and I think this is part of the, I'm going to look something up here in the meantime. I think this is part of the, you can call it a conspiracy, but I 100% believe that this is a bit of a scheme to create lifelong patients. This is something else that we saw in What is a Woman? There are doctors who make bank off these patients, and they have absolutely no motivation to stop because they do make so much money. And I talk often about capitalism that's divorced from morals. And I think this is the perfect example of it, because when you say to people you can make money doing anything, then they will. And honestly, more power to them. But you have to stop and ask whether there needs to be a sort of moral underpinning to how capitalism works, because capitalism is in fact completely neutral, much like money is. And if you stop and consider that once you take away the whole moral framework of a culture and you say, go ahead and earn money, people are going to do crazy things. And it blows my mind that we regulate things like, for example, sex work. I will mention this. It's a lot of the stuff that libertarians talk about with these illegal substances. Those are the things we regulate, but not this. Makes me crazy. Let's see what I wanted to pull up here. Okay, so we've got Tavistock is pausing. Okay, so England overhauls medical care for transgender youth. I was looking for an article about Tavistock, I think it was. Yeah, because they had a huge fight over it, and Tavistock halted trans care. Oh, yeah. Okay, so here, we can look at this. And I think this will talk about what I was wanting to find. Puberty blockers are given to children as young as 9 at Scotland's Tavistock Centre. Sandyford Clinic's under fire from giving life-changing drugs to autistic and troubled youngsters who may have been, quote, misdiagnosed as trans. So what I was hoping to find in this article was that the Tavistock Centre ended up closing their gender clinic for young people because they ended up saying, we believe that this transgender ideation is a fad for these young kids. Devastating blow to this whole industry that's developed around trying to get kids to be in this permanent patient state for the rest of their lives, which is what I suspect is happening, especially in the US. But we'll resume where we were before. That was just an aside. Okay, let's see here. Many physicians in the US. Okay, let's see. Okay, we read all the way down to the bottom. Cool. On her recommendation, England's National Health Service last month proposed restricting use of the drugs for trans use to research settings. Sweden and Finland have also placed limits on the treatment, concerned not just with the risk of blockers, but the steep rise in young patients, the psychiatric issues that many exhibit, and the extent to which their mental health should be assessed before treatment. That is fair. I'm glad that Europe is starting to kind of wake up to this. I hope the US does too. In the US, though, there is no universal policy and the public discussion is polarized. Well, we certainly know it is, and we're going to get into some of that as we move on. Republican governors and lawmakers in more than a dozen states are working to limit or even criminalize the treatments, as some in their party also seek to restrict access to sports and bathrooms, ban discussion of gender in public schools. That's a lie. We'll get back to that. And call into question whether transgender identity even exists. Okay, I would love to see an example of that. This month, the Florida Medical Board banned medications and surgeries for new patients under 18. Good, fine, fair analysis of what they did in Florida. And good for Florida, honestly. Meanwhile, the Biden administration describes transgender medicines as a civil right, and some advocates criticize anyone who questions the treatment's safety. Some advocates. Matt Walsh receives insane amounts of vitriol from this wing of these activists. It's insane to me. Like, he doesn't talk much about it, but in passing, he did say, he was like, I face some of the most ridiculous threats. This is crazy stuff that he never, when he spoke about anything else, had he received this kind of bile from people. And I was not surprised at all. This is incredibly polarized. And I think that people, it's so indicative to me that people care so much about getting kids into this stuff. You have to ask why. Why does it have to be kids? Why does it have to be people who are less than the age of accountability? We could get into drag queen story in an hour and how they're presenting this to young children. Very disturbing stuff. And this is something that absolutely requires this kind of research by journalistic institutions. Long-awaited research funded by the National Institutes of Health could provide more guidance. In 2015, 4 prominent American gender clinics were awarded $7 million to examine the effects of blockers and hormone treatments on transgender youth. In explaining their study, the researchers pointed out that the U.S. had produced no data on the impact or safety of blockers, particularly among transgender patients under 12, leaving a, quote, gap in evidence for this practice, end quote. 7 years in, they have yet to report key outcomes of their work, but say the findings are coming soon. Who believes them? I don't. Many young patients and their families have concluded that the benefits of easing the despair of gender dysphoria far outweigh the risks of taking blockers. That's a very personal choice. I think that if your parents are signing off on this, then you need to have a serious conversation with those parents, because it's not down to the child. The parent should be investigated thoroughly before any child gets on puberty blockers. I personally view this as a kind of Munchausen by proxy. I view a lot of this as the parents using their children as kind of an accessory to whatever is the fad at the moment. You guys have seen this, where celebrities adopt a child from every continent or whatever, and they kind of parade them around like some kind of weird, gross, like this fancy handbag that they just came across. It's disgusting, and they don't treat people like people. They treat them like accessories for this new whatever is cool at the moment, and it's just disturbing. But that's what I think about parents who sign off on this. For others, the limited studies and politicization of trans medicine can make it difficult to fully evaluate the decision. A Reuters examination of a range of transgender treatments also found scant research on long-term effects. That's a serious issue. If we don't know what's going to happen in the long term, no one can make a fully informed decision. There are medicines that I currently don't take because I'm trying to get pregnant, and there is no research that they will conduct on a pregnant woman to see if it affects her child. It's simply not a risk worth taking. So until then, I take injections, have terrible side effects, but it doesn't matter because to me it's worth it. I want to have a family. But this, I'm making a fully informed decision because I know that they're not going to be doing research on pregnant women and potentially putting their unborn infants' lives at risk. Okay, so let's continue a little bit. For years after starting the drugs, Emma Vasquez believes she's on the right path. Okay, she's like 16 years old now. Good for her. JC Chavira, now 22, decided that the medical treatment was not appropriate for her and resumed her female identity. And then they just leave it there. I would be really interested in checking back with JC and seeing how her health is doing after like 10 years. And I really hope that they are actually conducting studies about this, because they talk about polarization and they say that trans people are so targeted by this. But what they don't talk about is how they don't follow up with these people. You want to talk about the true polarization? No one's following up with JC. No one is following up with Chloe Cole. No one is following up with Helena Kirshner. And they're not doing their due diligence when it comes to actually finding out what puberty blockers do. And then the New York adolescent had such a significant loss in bone density after more than 2 years on the blockers, the parents halted the use of the drugs. There you go. There are parents who are actually paying attention, although if they had been, their 11-year-old probably wouldn't have been on puberty blockers in the first place. We went into this because we wanted to help, the mother said. Now I worry that we got into a situation with a very powerful drug and don't understand what the long-term effects will be. Yes, and that mother has a moral and ethical obligation to tell other people about that. She needs to tell people who are looking at the same thing what the outcome could possibly be. I don't know how she survives with her conscience if she is not taking that step. Honestly, that would, I don't know. That should be pushed strongly by every parent who has experience with this. I think we could, let's see, I think we could skip to the bottom here, and then we can kind of wrap it. It's a little bit longer than I was thinking it was. And they're obviously on the side of people who choose to try to do puberty blockers, which I still don't view as being fully, it's not fully transparent, and they're not being fully forthright with people, but at least they are taking the step of looking into this. I honestly do think this is a positive step from journalism. I know it's such a basic thing to ask from our journalists. It really is. But the fact that they're doing it all is, I mean, somebody needs to do it, and they have the backup to make it happen. I wish there had been more questions. No kidding. That's terrible. This is just a terribly long article. Let's get down to the bottom here. Okay, cool. Let's read the last couple paragraphs, and then we'll scoot over to what the Daily Caller has to say about it. It's excuse me, it's leading to concerns that people's well-intentioned scientific research could be misconstrued and exploited for political gain. The prospect of such an outcome is disheartening for the families of Emma Vasquez, Ms. Chavira, and the teen in New York. Despite their differing experiences, they share the same hopes for transgender medicine: less vitriol, more science. Well, I will counter by saying that until we know what this does to people long term, no one should be prescribed this for this purpose. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Lupron, but it was originally, I don't know if it was originally, but one of the uses that it was used for, one of the purposes it was used for was chemically castrating sex criminals. You guys are welcome to look this up. I remember learning about this and being so shocked and grossed out. And I remember going into the OB one day, and I was looking at this little model of like the female reproductive system, and I was like, oh, I wonder where this came from. I looked at it, and the book was sponsored by Lupron, and I was like, what is happening? Why is this in my OBGYN's office? I was so grossed out by this. Let's see what the Daily Caller has to say. They're the professionals. There's going to be a price. Growing body of evidence disputes claims that puberty blockers are safe, reversible. Puberty blockers are widely touted by doctors and transgender activists as a safe and fully reversible way to pause puberty for children with gender identity issues, but a growing body of evidence that challenges those claims. Okay, so it looks like they're going to summarize it in a similar way to we already did. So let's go to the bottom and see what their conclusion is too, for sure. Let's go on to. Okay. Without transitioning, about 80% of children with gender identity issues will outgrow them by the time they reach adulthood. That is interesting and not mentioned in the New York Times piece either. That is something that you should be familiar with. This is a fact that you can use to talk to people about trans issues who are genuinely compassionate and really want people to be happy and have amnesty, and to have purpose and meaning in life. You can tell them that most of the time people really do outgrow this, and this is why the Tavistock Institute paused this. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health did not respond to the Daily Caller News Foundation's request for comment. In related news, WPATH lowered the age that they thought that people should start transitioning children. So I think we know where they stand and who is giving them their money. So, oh, you know what? We have another article from the AP, and we're going to look at this one too. Let's look at this tweet first. In scores of countries, including parts of the US, transgender people must undergo painful, complex surgeries that often render them sterile before their genders are legally recognized, a practice human rights groups have condemned as torture. So I'd like you guys to just drink in the whole idea behind this. What they're saying is that transgender surgeries are painful and complex and render them sterile. But they're not saying that people shouldn't get them. What they're saying is that ID laws shouldn't require you to undergo these surgeries before you can identify as what you say you are on your driver's license. Let's look at their little headline down here. Dubbed torture, ID policies leave transgender people sterile. Now, if you were just to read that little headline by itself, you would probably be forced to conclude that policies about identification cards are literally coming off the printed pages that they're printed on and sterilizing people forcibly against their will. We know this is not the case. Transgender surgeries are optional. They are not required by law. We know this is true. And the fact that someone is going to require a transgender person to have gone through with a surgery before we will put male or female in contradiction of their birth sex, is not torture. It's not a form of torture. It's not a governmental imperative that people get these surgeries. These are people who they either want this. This is such a confusing headline because these people voluntarily want to consider themselves a different gender. All these states are doing is saying, if you haven't gotten the surgery, we're not going to change your gender on your identification, which the AP is just twisted beyond belief. But in either case, this makes me really glad that Matt Walsh, contrary to what Media Matters thinks, this makes me really glad that Matt Walsh lobbied against Vanderbilt pushing this stuff on kids. And they titled this very splashily. I love the picture. I love the headline. I'm sure that no one at the rally had a sign that said homosex is a sin. I love their headline, Death Threats, Proud Boys, and Homophobic Bigots. Very subjective. Matt Walsh's anti-trans rally drew a crowd of extremists. Okay, well, the fact that he had the rally and now the AP is saying these surgeries really are painful, intricate, and can leave people sterile, I think is a mark in Matt's favor. Let's give him a break for sure. I was so disturbed by this. This AP article grossed me out so much because it was like, how dare you stand there and say that these surgeries can leave people sterile, but you are going to promote them for people. It raises your blood pressure, and it makes you wonder if they're starting to kind of shift the narrative to be that in order to be trans, since we have such a fluid definition of gender, you shouldn't have to get any kind of surgery, which I think might kind of clash with these doctors who make, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars off these permanent patients. I suppose you could consider this a step in the right direction for them to be like, all right, well, just consider me a woman. I'm just not going to have the kind of surgery that used to be required for me to actually reassign my gender, and something that would make me that permanent patient to whatever terrible medical institution is willing to give me this surgery and then these drugs and then just see me once a week, every week for the rest of my life. I guess it's a positive thing. I do think that we have to credit Matt Walsh for this, and I think the biggest takeaway that I want to leave you guys with this evening, because I've gone a little bit long, is that this kind of polarization that the New York Times was talking about, they're correct, but I think not in the way they think they are. They think that it's just the anti-trans bigots who are making this so terrible. But what they're starting to realize with this actual study that they're doing is that there hasn't been enough research into this, and that this stuff is being prescribed willy-nilly, like beyond anything that the American, the US, I think it's the FDA. I want to say USDA. I think it's the FDA. The FDA has never signed off on. And this is a serious problem, and we don't know the long-term effects. I'm glad they're starting to realize this, although I won't hold my breath. I do have to say that this kind of polarization affects kids the most. And I think that you and I and everybody in our position, like with, like kind of a limited social outreach, just the people that they know on a regular basis, maybe the people they go to church with, the people their kids go to school with, owes it to these kids to try to make sure that the polarization is not so much that people are unwilling to say, you know what, we do need more scientific research on this. We absolutely do. And I think that that should be some of our most serious motivation to try to bring down the temperature in this country, because there are kids who depend on us. And more power to Matt Walsh for making this happen, because he did What is a Woman? He had that rally. He has been fearless about speaking about this, even though people are coming after him nonstop. And I really hope that this will kind of open the door to more research into whether this is a positive for these young kids, because I think unbiased research, like actual science, the science that I used to really enjoy and care about the most, that long before COVID happened, I hope that science will truly demonstrate to people this is not the right choice for young kids. If adults choose to do this, fine, whatever. That's a totally different kettle of fish. But the fact that this has been foisted on children with, I truly believe, the end goal of making them into lifetime dependent patients is staggering and disgusting. And I think it's a huge stain on our national identity. But I will wrap it there. Let me see what you guys have been saying. I got a few super chats. Thank you guys so much for chatting to me. I appreciate that. St. Miles says, my first super chat to support your endeavors. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Savvy D says, we need to stand up for children. I know we want to give parents some levity to be parents. I think you may mean leeway. But this stuff is really damaging. Great work. I'm assuming you're speaking to me. I hope that I'm doing great work. Thank you very much. I hope that you guys will go and check out this New York Times article. I put an archive link in my description, as I do for things that are behind a paywall. I hope you guys will check it out. Nuclear now, solar later says no amnesty for this atrocity. I am curious how history is going to look back on this phase of our scientific research, because we just have not done our due diligence on this, and I think it's going to damage a lot of people. I think the class action lawsuits are going to be insane. I believe Chloe Cole is actually filing a lawsuit against the doctors who signed off on this for her. And honestly, more power to her. That is challenging. I know, that's really tough. It's hard when you're in this situation and you feel like you really have like an obligation to speak out for the kids who are being affected by what you went through. I know it's really hard, and it's easier to just sit down and kind of be upset about it from a distance, but you absolutely are doing the right thing, Chloe, for sure. And I hope that you set the precedent the rest of these kids need. And I hope you have the support that you need from the right, because I truly believe that whoever writes the history books, they will find that the people who oppose this were on the right side of history. I don't think you can argue with that. The only thing I could see happening would be if the left ends up winning ultimately in the long run, would be for them to say, oh, this never happened. This wasn't really a thing. And this is kind of a thing you can see happening with journalism already. But I digress. I will see you guys tomorrow in a totally new setting. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I will be hopefully with a slightly more lighthearted topic for sure, since tomorrow is Tuesday and we try to have good news Tuesdays. I do my best, okay? I know it's easy to get caught up in all terrible news that's happening, but I will see you guys tomorrow in my new place. And until then, bye guys.